Hello everyone, welcome to Alpart Finance Training by Dafang Wu. This is session E1, Excel Format Guide. This is a working session, so we'll switch to Excel to talk about the formatting issues. There are two reasons we want to format an Excel file. First is to look professional. When we deliver a product to our internal team or a client, the first thing they will notice is not about the structure of the model or what this model does, it's about the look of the model. If the model looks crappy, then nobody wants to spend time to figure out whether the logic is right or not. The second issue is it needs to be user-friendly. Regardless who you think you build the model for, eventually we are actually the major user of the model. So we need to like the model. The model needs to be constructed to be the most convenient to ourselves. So in that case, we need to look at the formatting side. One good thing I can tell you, it doesn't really need that kind of time to do the formatting. On the right side of the screen, you can see a model I built basically as to demonstrate I understand the Los Angeles financial situation several weeks ago. So as you see the model, this is the model maybe like 15 tabs. It takes me probably 12 hours to get the content as well as formatting the file. So when you look at it eventually, at least it looks pretty clean. So let's go back on the left side to see how we want to format a file. First of all, the first thing you notice is about the file name. If you look at this one, this is called 150315. So what I'm practicing myself is use a consistent format for the file names. It all started with 2-digit year, then 2-digit month, then 2-digit day. Then we got the Alpart code following it. The good thing about this one is if you sort the file names, then you can clearly see which file is the most recent model. Well, eventually, if you have 200 copies of the same model, then you understand why I need this function. Second is, when we build the model for each tab, so we want to use the shortest tab name as possible. So in that case, you can see a lot of tabs all at the same time. This surely comes as a downside, because when you first open the model, you will not be able to know what tab E is about. But well, we compensated that problem with designing a TOC tab, table of content. So right here, you can see what tab is about. And if you follow this kind of naming protocol for like a year or so, then you clearly will remember what each tab is about. So that wouldn't be a problem anymore. The third point is you want to set up the print at each page so it prints out nicely on one or several pages. There is one thing that makes everyone annoyed is when they click the print button, they got 200 pages of garbage data printed there without any explanation that is not what they wanted. So in that case, even if you have a very large worksheet, it's important you make sure it prints out nicely. If it's not possible to print out everything, then at least you need to select part of the model for printout. As you see here, if the model actually has many columns on the right side, one thing you want to do is to use View, Freeze Pens, then, well, let's unfreeze pens first. Then you want to click on this cell, then click Freeze Pens. So in that case, when you scroll to the right side, you can still see all the column header and the row headers. This is pretty good if you have a big worksheet, but you want to still figure out what this line is about. The next one is to use self-explanatory titles. On this one, you can see this tab is just called Capital Improvement Project. This is quite important because when you eventually print out this page, you won't tell people from the title what this page is about. An Excel file really needs to stand for itself without further explanation. That requires us to really put the title there. We also need to put the source there if it's necessary. If the source has several dates, then you want to specify what date you obtain the data and from whom if possible. Of course, you don't want to show the people's name in the printout, but you can always hide things outside the printable range. That's where it's also important just to click on the View tab and make sure you put this on as a printable on the print view, so you can see nothing will be printed out accidentally in the printable range. Next one is if you don't need any worksheets, just delete it. Every worksheet in this file needs to serve a purpose. If it doesn't serve a purpose, then, well, it doesn't really need to belong there. It's important because the smaller the file is, the easier it's easy to manipulate. You don't want to confuse people with 300 different tabs, with each with a long name. Then in that case, no one can find information in the file anymore. On the formatting side, you can see all the Excel files I'm using has a very consistent format. This is also important because it conveys an image of professional. So I use Arial font just for everything. Well, if you like, you can choose Calibri or Times New Roman. It doesn't matter. It's so long as you are consistent, so long as it's read legibly, so it doesn't really matter what font you're using. I use the 12 font for the top rows, and I use 10 font for font size 10 for all the other content. One thing I also use is use a lower border on the cell. So basically, if you go to the home, you will see right there, this is the bottom border. So I use that one to separate between the body of the table, between the body of the table and the nodes and the sources. When we go to each row, then the one thing I really like is to not adjust anything on the row height. Just let it be. Sometimes I see people reducing the row height. I feel it's not necessary. It makes the file look inconsistent. So I just use the same height for every row. I will encourage you not to hide any rows, especially in the printable range. If you hide the row, then people will tend to ignore it. Then the content within those hidden rows sometimes are still included in the calculation. But in that case, it may be outdated, it may be inaccurate. So in that case, you don't want to hide any rows unless absolutely necessary. For the columns, it's the same story. The most easy way is just to pick everything and go to the format and pick auto-fit column width. That's the easiest thing to do. I like that approach. Otherwise, you can specify what do you want row column width to be. Well, right now it's 9. You can change to 10 to space it out a little bit. Regardless of what you want the consistent column width on under each fiscal years. Similarly, if on the left side, you see I always just have several extra columns. It's because sometimes I need to run a calculation, I need to hide some indexed column there. Let me see whether I can find an example on the traffic side. Probably this is not. So for example, I do have some historical data, that's the 2010 to 2013 there. I think it's useful from time to time, but well, it's not necessary to do the exhibits. My exhibits start with 2013. So in that case, I just put the data there. You don't want to print this out, so in that case, you want to hide it. The benefit of hiding a column is this column will not really be used in the calculation. So in that case, if you hide it, it's not like a hidden row, then you may run into some big problems. So another thing I like is indent. As you see from here, if you indent something, it looks a pretty structured layout. On the accounting side, people actually use different layers of indent to show the structure. For example, in the accounting side, this probably will be indented twice. I figured, well, it really occupies a lot of space, so I no longer indented that feature. I just indent to make this read legibly. So this is how I do that. So when we go to the cell formatting, the first thing you notice is I format all the numbers as a counting format. I think that's just one way I like it to be consistent. So for example, when we put the top rows there, of course, it's just the dollar amount, so we show the dollar amount. If it's employed passengers or anything else, we don't need to show the dollar, but we still want to show the accounting. There is one issue about the accounting is if you don't use accounting, the underline will not extend to the beginning of the cell. That's one major reason I use the accounting format rather than number format. As we said, we want to use the dollar signs of the first row when applicable. We want to use a single accounting underline. So if you right-click Format Cell, go to the font, then that's where I pick the single accounting underline. So there's a similar issue there is if you format a cell, if you want to add one digit, you have to go to the format cell, then just add the digit over there. If you try to add the digit right over there, it doesn't really work. I think if you try to use this one or this one, it will change the format to a very strange situation. So for example, if you change this one to 2 digits, then if you click the formatting cell, it becoming a customized font size. Then everything will be kind of like annoying. You can't predict how it will perform. So in that case, I want you to change the decimal point by going through the formatting cells. The last line, if it's a sum function, so for example right here you see it's a sum function, it indicates all the numbers above that adds up to this number. You can use underline. For the multiplication, then you can also use that one, but if you're dividing the number, this one by this one, get a number, then you shouldn't put an underline behind it, below it. So on all the files, I don't want you to use text wrapping. If you use text wrapping, by text wrapping I mean this. If you right-click Format Cells and go to Alignment, if you go to Wrap Cell, it will make this row twice as high, so it can print out everything. But this really looks odd. If you look at the numbers, everything lines up perfectly, then suddenly you got one line that has 2 rows height. It just looks odd. So I would say we either increase width of this column or we just try to shorten the name. You can always find a way to shorten it, like capitalize the interest or just to say this capitalize the interest income instead, like this. So you can always figure out a way to do that. The other things I want to emphasize is don't use merge cells. As you see right here, when I try to put some things in center of several columns, I use format cells. Go to alignment, then there is a center across selections. I think this is a much better way to show some content across several columns rather than merging. There is a downside for merging. You see I added a temporary column there. So you see this cell is actually merged between column D and column G. If you want to cut column E and paste it somewhere else, then it will tell you you cannot change part of a merged cell. That's the problem. So sometimes you do want to cut it. So in that case, I will encourage you to use center across the columns rather than merging cells. The last point is, well, if you have some text, you need to include in the middle. For example, if this one doesn't apply, you want to put not applicable, you can see it goes to the left side of the cell. So you want to put this right aligned, so it still looks very consistent formatting like this. So well, I think that's all I want to talk about Excel formatting. In the next sessions, I will talk about some principles when we try to structure a financial model. Thanks.